The most mentally health-literate generation in human history is also the most anxious, the most depressed, and the loneliest generation ever recorded. Gen Z can name attachment styles before they've experienced a stable one. They can diagram an anxiety response before they've had a single therapy session. They have the vocabulary, they just can't stop feeling this way. And that paradox, knowing exactly what's wrong and being unable to change it, might be the most Gen Z thing that exists. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from never being fully anywhere. You're at dinner and part of you is monitoring how the dinner would look as a story. You're having a genuinely good time and some other part of you is already composing the caption. You laugh at something real, and then you glance sideways to see if the people around you laughed too. Not because you needed their approval, but because your brain has been quietly, systematically trained to read external feedback the way a compass reads magnetic north. You didn't choose this. It happened so gradually that you don't even remember a version of yourself that worked differently. And that's not weakness, that's neuroscience. Research at UCLA by Dr. Naomi Eisenberger revealed something that felt almost too literal to believe. Social rejection activates the same neural regions as physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex, same circuitry. The same brain architecture that makes you flinch when you touch a hot pan is the architecture that fires when you post something and watch the silence that follows. For Gen Z, who received constant quantified social feedback during the most critical window of brain development, adolescence, this circuitry didn't just learn, it became infrastructure. What that means in real life, the low-level anxiety you feel when you haven't checked your phone in 2 hours isn't about missing something. It's your brain running a threat detection loop because at some point, online space became where belonging was measured, not chosen, measured. The psychological term for what happens next is social comparison processing, and Leon Festinger mapped it in 1954, long before any of this existed. His theory, humans compulsively evaluate themselves against others, not out of vanity, but because it's how we calibrate our sense of reality. The problem is that comparison was designed for a village, a handful of people, known faces, real context. Gen Z inherited a global, curated, highlight-only audience of millions. The comparison engine didn't break, it just ran on jet fuel in a room built for a candle. What that produces is a chronic, low-grade inadequacy with no specific object. You don't feel inferior to one person, you feel quietly, vaguely behind some composite ideal assembled from 1,000 different strangers' best moments. And you can't argue yourself out of it because the feeling isn't logical, it's structural. Then there's what researchers call the default mode network, the part of the brain that activates during rest, that wanders, that daydreams, that quietly assembles your sense of self. Studies in JAMA Pediatrics found that heavy social media use disrupts this resting state neural activity in adolescence, which means Gen Z may be the first generation to have reached adulthood with a chronically interrupted self. Not because they're shallow, but because the specific cognitive quiet that selfhood requires was almost never available. Boredom used to be where you found out who you were, and if boredom was always one swipe away from elimination, the self had fewer chances to speak. Dr. John Cacioppo's decades of research at the University of Chicago found that chronic loneliness doesn't just feel bad, it changes gene expression patterns in ways that mirror chronic stress. Nearly 79% of Gen Z reports feeling lonely, making them statistically the loneliest generation ever measured. And yet, they are almost never alone. That's not irony, that's the architecture of a particular kind of disconnection, where presence is everywhere and contact is rare. Here's the part nobody actually says out loud. Gen Z's hyper-awareness of psychology, the fluency, the vocabulary, the ability to name what's happening in real time, can quietly become a way of watching yourself suffer more precisely rather than suffering less. Knowing the name of the cage doesn't open the door, And there's a private grief in being someone who can explain exactly why they feel the way they feel and still feel it completely. The self-awareness arrived. The relief it was supposed to bring hasn't. That's not failure. That's what it costs to be the generation that had to figure out the rules of a game that was still being invented while you were playing it. There's something that has no name yet, and it lives in the specific few seconds after you close an app you didn't even mean to open. That split second of what exactly? Not guilt, not sadness, something closer to the feeling of having briefly left your body and returned to find it exactly where you left it. Same room, same age, same unresolved things waiting quietly on the counter. It's the aloneness of being deeply aware of your own experience and having nowhere to put that awareness that doesn't immediately get flattened into content, into a relatable meme, into a tweet that makes 2,000 strangers say same, which should feel like connection, and does, for about 11 seconds. You are not consumed by the internet. You are navigating a world where interiority itself has become a performance category, where even your most private moments carry a phantom comment section, where being perceived is so constant that you've started to confuse being seen with being known. The heaviness isn't in the screen, it's in the weight of a world that watches the performance and quietly calls it you. If any of this felt like someone reached into a very specific corner of your experience and turned on a light, leave a comment with one thing you do that you've never seen anyone else name. Not a mood, not a label, a specific moment, a specific habit. I want to read them. If this channel feels like somewhere that actually knows what you're carrying, subscribe. That's the whole ask.